4 years ago, our family left our home in Caldwell, Idaho to travel full-time.
Are we there yet? I can't think of to go where.
Hey, now you gotta be a good hiker.
My name's Jonathan Farrell, and this is my family. We've been to all 50 US states in the past 4 years, as well as taken some detours to more exotic locales. We've traveled full-time, which means exactly what it sounds like. We had no home, and everything we owned was in this car, except for a 5x10 storage unit which we left behind. I have lived out of this suitcase for 4 years. Our trip started in the western United States. At first, we honestly had no idea what we were doing. We began to make large loops around the West, crossing off states close to Idaho, where we had left from. We had no plan. This is how we saw most of the West, just choosing somewhere to go and finding Airbnbs to stay and explore. We crossed off Utah, Idaho, Nevada, Montana, and California like this. We'd already visited Oregon and Washington a few months earlier. So in a relatively short amount of time, we had seen most of the western United States. We were reluctant to go too far, however, because of one thing. My mother-in-law had cancer. Annette discovered she had terminal metastatic breast cancer in March of 2017. We didn't know how much time we'd have left with her. And so as we traveled that first year, we continually circled back in. But Annette was a fighter. She insisted she was fine. In fact, she did some traveling of her own. And so we began to make some longer trips. We spent a glorious 5 weeks traveling the East Coast, visiting New York, Vermont, Maine, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., New Hampshire, Connecticut, New Jersey,
Is it tight?
We slowly made our way back across the country to Idaho for a family reunion in December, making sure to stop for barbecue in Kansas City and see cousins in Texas. This would be the first of many long loops back and forth we'd do across the United States.
I wish I could go back in time so that I could. Well, if you went back in time.
Okay, guys. How we all doing?
You know, it's a weird feeling. We've had this car for many, many years, and it's carried us across the country and almost all the way back, and now it's a little bittersweet saying goodbye.
By this time, we had already visited 36 of the 50 United States. But our travel aspirations were bigger than just the US. We wanted to go somewhere a bit more exotic. The plan was to go to Mexico, to a place called Puerto Peñasco on the Sea of Cortez. The idea was to get our feet wet with international travel. There was only one problem though. I was severely afraid of going to Mexico. Looking back on it, my fears were totally irrational, but let me explain where they came from. When I was 19 years old, I served a mission for my church. I lived in Tijuana, Mexico for almost 2 years. It was an amazing experience, honestly, life-changing. But during that time, I had some really scary experiences. For example, the time some men tried to force me into a car to kidnap me, or the time that a group of drunks tried to stone me with baseball-sized rocks, or the time I was mugged with a gun to my head. This all happened. Tijuana was rough around the edges, to say the least. So naturally, I had a bit of PTSD when it came to traveling to Mexico again, especially bringing my family there. In fact, the day we drove into the country to go to Puerto Peñasco, I was hyper paranoid. We arrived at our Airbnb and I immediately declared that we were not staying. Thankfully, my amazing wife helped me work through the fear. After a week, I had calmed down and Mexico felt like an old friend. Actually, we ended up staying 2 more weeks. So after a successful international excursion, we again checked in with Annette, who actually seemed more alive than ever. She told us to be free and go where the wind took us. So that's when we made the crazy decision to go live in Guatemala for a month.
Are you gonna eat your breakfast so we can go to Guatemala? Okay, go in. Move aside, guys. Matthew, stand on the right. Excited, Ellie? Good job. That is a lot of quaddies. Is it worth it? Awesome.
When we came back to the States, we found our van's brakes had rusted solid in the humid Houston weather. After an expensive repair, we crossed off the southern states, driving through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. We were in Florida when word came that Annette wasn't doing well. And so we traveled back to Idaho, passing through Georgia, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Oklahoma on our way back. I'm not gonna lie, these constant check-ins back in Idaho were really taxing on everyone emotionally. It's a terrible feeling to be waiting for someone you know and who you love to die. Every stop back in Idaho, we could tell that Annette was a little bit worse. But her positive attitude and her zeal for life kept her going long after the doctors had projected she would live. It was about this time that our oldest daughter Emma was about to turn 13 years old. We told each of our kids that when they became teenagers, we would take them on a trip, wherever they wanted to go. Long story short, my sister-in-law was living in Australia and offered us a free place to stay. So Emma, Sarah, and I took a trip to the land down under. It was nothing short of incredible. When we got back, we knew that time was up. My mother-in-law was an amazing person, and her death was a huge blow to everyone that knew her. It was so hard to believe that she was gone. She was a woman who had so much love, so much life, it seemed like she would just keep on going forever. In the wake of her passing, we wandered somewhat aimlessly. For one part, there was a sense of release, knowing we had nothing keeping us from going anywhere. At the same time, there was a hole in our hearts, and more than ever, we felt the need to get away. By now, we had visited 43 of the 50 US states, but to be honest, we were hungry for a detour from our US travels. Our time in Guatemala had sparked a fire for Latin America in our souls. Without any reason to stay stateside or to constantly revisit Idaho, we felt permission to go somewhere far away. Very far away. A crazy plan to drive to southern Mexico had been on our minds for months. We pulled up a map of Latin America and looked for a house. Out of all the options between Utah and South America, there was only one that really stuck out. It was in a small city in southern Mexico called San Cristobal de las Casas. We knew literally nothing about this place, nothing. But it felt right, and we booked it almost immediately. And thus began an insane journey over the next 8 months. I'm not even going to go into the details about our Mexico trip. I actually already have a whole video series and 2 playlists on our YouTube channel about the trip itself and about our time there. To summarize though, this time of our lives was incredible. I can't even begin to explain the depth of the experiences we had exploring the state of Chiapas and getting to know its incredible people. We got heavily involved in humanitarian causes and came to know the locals on a level that foreigners are not usually able to reach. We lived in southern Mexico for 7 months, with only a short 2-week excursion to Guatemala to break up that time. We made lifelong friends, and I did work with some really cool nonprofit organizations. It was life-changing. We had originally planned to stay for 10 months. The plan was then to return to the States and to go to Alaska. And that's when something totally unexpected happened.
Breaking news.
The COVID-19 pandemic is worsening, now in its 4th month.
Suddenly the world changed, and it changed so quickly. People were panicking, borders were closing. A part of us wanted to just stay in Mexico and ride out the storm, but we also didn't know how long the storm would last. The thought of getting stuck in Mexico was scary, and for some very valid reasons that I'm not going to go into. We made a hard decision and decided to leave Chiapas. We drove back up through Mexico in just 2 days. All the while, borders were closing behind us. It was incredibly stressful, and it was actually really scary. We crossed into Texas on the 23rd of March, 2019, late in the afternoon at a lonely border station. It honestly felt surreal. We proceeded to San Antonio and quarantined ourselves as the world fell apart. I wanted to record this to kind of remember what it was like during this time. We made it back to the United States, and we've just been sheltering in place like we've been told to do, quarantine. It's been almost a month now since we've returned from Chiapas. To be honest, it's been really hard. You see, when you travel full-time, you don't have anywhere to go back to. We didn't have a home where we could return and hunker down. We literally were homeless. We spent the next several weeks in Texas with family, trying to make sense of life and trying to figure out what was next. We needed somewhere to hunker down and to be able to get through the insanity of 2020. We needed a place to spend the winter. We had passed through Minnesota in 2018, and we had some friends there. The lake country was beautiful, and it was secluded. It felt like a good place to ride out the pandemic, so we found a wonderful home on Lake Latoka and carefully made our way through Nebraska and Iowa to our winter abode. Despite the pandemic, we made the most of our winter experiences in Minnesota. We made many trips up to the north shore of Lake Superior and took full advantage of the winter weather to snowshoe, ice skate, ice fish, and even experience a real polar plunge. I've never felt so cold as I did that winter, but I wouldn't trade it for the world, honestly. We made some lifetime friends in Minnesota, and somehow the seclusion and the beauty of the region made the pandemic not feel so hard. As the new year dawned and COVID started to taper off a bit, we felt at liberty to move around more. We went back west to visit family and spent some time just living life, renting Airbnbs in familiar places in Idaho and Utah. We made a trip back out to Minnesota at the beginning of the summer, making sure to spend some time in North Dakota. We still had 4 states to visit to hit all 50. North Carolina, South Carolina, Hawaii, and Alaska were the ones that we were missing. At the end of that summer, we decided to close the gap. It was time to put a lid on all 50. We traveled out to Pennsylvania, where my brother lives, and then we made our way down through the eastern states, spending time closer to the coast, in places such as Chincoteague and the Outer Banks.
Okay, final state of the lower 48.
Hey, that rhyme.
Lower states of the 48.
Alright. South Carolina.
Is ours.
Good job.
We saw North and South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, and then as winter approached, we went to Florida, where we spent close to 2 months getting the full Florida experience. My favorite was the Florida Keys. I could have honestly spent a year down there if it weren't so expensive. Now all that remained was Alaska and Hawaii. However, I was really itching to go international again. I was recalling all our incredible experiences in Mexico and really wanted to do another trip to Latin America. It seemed like Providence when an opportunity arose for us to meet a bunch of other traveling families down on the coast of Ecuador. It was a 2-week meetup. Sarah, however, had a bad feeling about the whole thing. I assured her it would be amazing. I should have listened. We started to plan a 6-month trip that would take us to South America, Ecuador, the Galapagos, even the Amazon rainforest, which is a place that's been on my bucket list since I was a little kid. I had big plans. We even went as far as booking a house in the Galapagos where we would live for a month. In preparation for this huge trip, we'd come back to Idaho and were staying with my parents for the Christmas holiday. The plan was to leave January 6th, 2022 for our South America adventures. We were packed, flights were booked, it was all arranged. And that's when the unthinkable happened. We literally got COVID 2 days before we left. I was crushed. The whole family tested positive despite being fully vaccinated. Our South America plans were literally in the toilet. The irony of it all was that we had survived for 2 years of pandemic with no infection. And then 2 days before we were going to leave, we got sick. Thankfully, the sickness was very mild for us and we recovered quickly. After a few weeks, we were testing negative again. By this time though, the wind was totally out of our sails and South America was just off the table. Sarah's premonition was prophetic, but we later found out just how prophetic. It was at this time that another traveling family contacted Sarah and let her know that they would be out of town for a few weeks and their house in Hawaii would be open for us, free of charge. We'd put off Hawaii this whole time traveling the States because it was so expensive. So this was our chance. We were back in the race for the 50 states. In hindsight, it was a blessing that South America didn't work out. We got to go spend 3 weeks in Hawaii with a free place to stay and had some incredible experiences. I got scuba certified while we were there, we snorkeled with manta rays, and I crossed off a bucket list item of seeing a shark in the wild. It was a magical vacation and honestly a great way to see our 49th state. Little did we know though that life had one more curveball for us right around the corner before we could reach all 50 states. So my father-in-law had gotten COVID a couple weeks earlier. This was around the time that the Omicron variant was just running rampant through the United States. And although he recovered from it, it did some serious damage to his lungs. While we were in Hawaii, he was hospitalized because he couldn't breathe. And within only 7 weeks, he passed away of COVID complications. I loved my mother and father-in-law, and we lost both of them during the 4 years of our travel. You know, a lot of people think that traveling full-time is just all fun. But life continues whether you're in paradise or not. In hindsight, it's probably a good thing that we didn't make it to South America because we literally would have been in the Amazon jungle if our plans had worked out. Instead, we were able to say goodbye. Well, if you've made it this far, congratulations. It's been quite a journey, but we aren't quite done. There's still one more state to reach all 50. In summer this year, our family visited the last of the 50 states, Alaska. We had originally planned to drive to Alaska. That's what I really wanted to do. I still want to do it. We'll probably do it someday still. But after the emotional roller coaster of the past 4 years, we felt we deserved to cross this last one off in style. The thought of a long journey felt really exhausting in our already emotionally compromised states. So we did the logical thing and booked a cruise to Alaska. On June 1st, 2022, our feet touched Alaskan soil, almost exactly 4 years from the time we first left to travel.
I'm feeling on top of the world, like nothing's ever gonna bring me down. This feeling got me flying high as a bird.
Oh my goodness.
I may never touch the ground.
Oh my gosh.
It may not be my birthday, but I just wanna celebrate. I just wanna celebrate, 'cause it's a good day, good life. I just wanna celebrate all night. There's nothing like feeling alive. There's nothing like feeling alive. I just wanna say